All right, we are hearing some Republicans speaking out against Donald Trump's plan to, quote, run Venezuela. Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania said in a statement, quote, the only country that the United States of America should be running is the United States of America. The United States should join the international community in monitoring and overseeing a free and fair election in Venezuela, allowing the Venezuelan people a pathway to a true democracy. Joining us now is Republican Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna of Florida. Congresswoman, thank you so much for coming back on the show. Let me start by your reaction to that statement from your colleague. What is your response to the notion that America should be running America, not, as President Trump said, running Venezuela?
I actually happen to be very good friends with Representative Fitzpatrick, and I do think that that is our full intention. As far as I know, it is our objective to bring our guys back home as soon as possible and to ensure that the president of Mexico, who was actually elected, sees a peaceful transfer of power. And so I'm sure that that will happen, hopefully sooner rather than later.
The president of the United States today said that it was the vice president, Delcy Rodriguez. You're saying it's not Delcy Rodriguez. Are you on the same page as the president, or are you aspiring for something different for Venezuela?
I'm on the same page as the president, but what I will say is that we know for a while that the international community has not recognized Maduro and that his entire administration, as well as their election process, was essentially stolen from the people of Venezuela. And so I have all the faith in the world that the peaceful transition of power will happen. And you're actually seeing an overwhelming amount of support from the people, not just in Venezuela, but also Venezuelan Americans here that support what the president has done.
But, Congresswoman, if you're on the same page as the president, that doesn't quite align, because the Venezuelan people, both here in the United States and in that country, they support Machado, who Trump said in the presser this morning he actually thinks doesn't have the respect inside the country. And he is in touch with, coordinating with, it sounds like Rubio is, with Delcy Rodriguez, who is implicated in all the same crimes that Maduro has taken part in. Venezuelans that I've spoken to say that she is implicated in all of it, that she's responsible for jailing and harming dissidents in the country. And so the idea that the U.S. is coordinating with her right now is incredibly alarming to them. And that's even Venezuelans who support this president. They're a bit alarmed by what he said about Delcy Rodriguez today.
I haven't heard that same reaction, so that's interesting that you guys are getting a 180 out reaction. But it is interesting to note that most mainstream sources are not pointing out the fact that Maduro, if you want to talk about ultimately why the United States has done what we've done, aside from him being literally a narco trafficker, actually put out an active hit on Marco Rubio when he was a then senator. And so you're seeing that the government of Venezuela currently, I do think, has still a propaganda campaign in effect to try to make it look like what the United States did was wrong. But ultimately, again, it's the perspective of this administration to get in and ensure that the person who is rightfully elected is put into power and then ultimately bring our guys back home. I don't necessarily think it's a long-term plan in staying there, and I certainly would not support that. But I do know that this president had made numerous efforts to reach out and talk directly with Maduro and his, if you want to call it an administration, which, again, I don't think that Maduro was legitimately elected. And ultimately, I do think that the Secretary of State is doing exactly what he is doing to further our efforts and our safety for the American people.
Do you really feel that the president is focused on free and fair elections? Because in his presser this morning, he used the word oil 20 times. He mentioned wealth 2 times. He mentioned drugs 4 times. But he said the word democracy 0 times. He said free or fair elections 0 times. He didn't really make his major speech to the country this morning about the freedom and liberty of Venezuelans at all.
Well, you know, I did watch his press conference, and I'm not the president's speechwriter, but what I will tell you is when he was pointing out the fact that Nicolas Maduro is actively a narco trafficker, that he ultimately is responsible for the death of many Americans. And again, I don't know why the mainstream media is not talking about this, but when Secretary Rubio was a senator, Nicolas Maduro put out a hit on the secretary. So as far as I'm concerned, even if we did play on the,
we know that Maduro is not a good guy.
Play on the same parallel as the international courts, they would also say that that's literally an act of war to do against a sitting Secretary of State. But the point would be is that I believe that the president absolutely has an invested interest. Look, we don't need Venezuela's oil. We have our Permian Basin. We're perfectly good to go here. But ultimately, again, I think President Trump is doing will stabilize the United States for generations to come, and it will ultimately be responsible for many Americans not dying from fentanyl overdoses, et cetera. It has been interesting to note, though, that you're seeing the president and many countries that have been run by cartels, for example, Mexico, react in a negative light as opposed to countries like Argentina, for example.
Okay, so two things. Did you read the indictment that was unsealed by Pam Bondi?
I read some of it, and I know I think it's one of the first pages that cocaine is referenced.
Okay. Fentanyl is not mentioned in that, and neither is this alleged hit that you're talking about Nicolas Maduro putting out on Senator Marco Rubio. Why would the Trump administration not indict him on what you're making to be a huge claim by an adversary of the United States against a sitting U.S. senator? Why do you think they didn't?
It's definitely an important piece of information, and I will make sure that I follow up with Todd Blanche and suggest that they try to charge him for that as well.
That's not what you're saying. You're justifying the actions of the administration. You're justifying the actions of the administration by citing fentanyl and citing an alleged hit on Senator Marco Rubio. Both of those. Fentanyl
and cocaine and drugs have been definitely trafficked out of Venezuela.
Fentanyl is not mentioned at all in the indictment against Nicolas Maduro.
I'm actually telling you confirmed information. I'm telling you confirmed information. So what I would do if I were you is I would reach out to the Secretary's office and see if Nicolas Maduro put out a hit on him. And I just said that I would follow up with the DOJ.
I'm just telling you it's not mentioned in the indictment, and I'm asking you to explain why it's not mentioned in the indictment.
Department of Justice. I don't know. I don't work at the Department of Justice, but I think that would be a good thing for you guys to follow up on.
Do you think maybe it's not a real thing do you think it's maybe not a real thing that they have any evidence to substantiate it?
No, I don't think that it's not a real thing. I think it definitely happened, and I definitely confirmed it with two separate people before I came onto your show because I wanted to share that with you. And I would suggest that you guys follow up with the Secretary's office because I do think that that's something that the American people should know.
The Secretary has an open invitation to come on the show at any time. I can promise you that. I want to know what your message is, Congresswoman, to your voters, to people who are part of the MAGA movement, who voted for Trump because he and people around him said consistently during the campaign that we were getting out of forever wars, we were not going to be spending American taxpayer dollars overseas, that he was going to be focused, laser focused on making life affordable here. I spoke to people on the campaign trail who believed in the president on that issue, who maybe had scarring experiences or their kids had scarring experiences serving abroad in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they didn't want anything like that to happen. And we're already seeing that some of them are fearful that what we heard described earlier today, if the U.S. is running Venezuela for a certain period of time, not indefinitely, if the U.S. is going to have to worry about transporting oil, sort of resetting up refineries there, that's going to require a lot of boots on the ground. Is it not?
Well, look, I'm a United States Air Force veteran. My husband was shot in Afghanistan, so obviously we're not for forever wars. However, from my understanding, the president was talking about private investment. So I obviously am not in the administration, but based on his own statements, I would assume that that's not taxpayer dollars, that that's actually.
But what's your message to voters who say this is not what I voted for?
Aside from that, I'll get to that in a second. Aside from that, this time last year when President Biden was still in office prior to the November elections, we actually had oil in Pinellas County over $3 a gallon. Now it's under $2 and some change, right, in various areas. We saw egg prices that have now gone down. And what I will tell you is the president's perspective and this administration's perspective is peace through strength. And your sons and daughters will not be drafted into another foreign war. But aside from that, literally a few weeks ago, I was on a ride along and we found 2 pounds of fentanyl in the last couple of weeks. Our Florida Department of Corrections found that during these various probation check-ins. That's enough to kill more people in Pinellas County multiple times over. So when you're talking about the president's war on drugs, essentially stopping the Maduro regime from trafficking drugs into this country, I'm very glad that he did what he did because he essentially saved people in Pinellas County.
A lot of experts are concerned that this is going to cause destabilization, not just for Venezuelans who may have to deal with a power vacuum for a period of time, but in Colombia, in Cuba, and elsewhere. Are Republicans considering maybe reversing their actions on TPS, for example, and making it easier for those people to come to the United States right now if their home countries are destabilized because of the action that we have taken?
What's interesting is because of President Trump's actions, I actually saw reports today from a local Florida outlet that there are some former, I guess, Venezuelan refugees that are looking to head back home now because Maduro has been essentially removed and brought back to the United States. But also, too, I don't know, and I don't necessarily think that there will be a destabilization in these other countries, Mexico, Cuba, et cetera. Again, I don't have a crystal ball, but it's not the perspective and directive of the administration to cause such. But what I will also say is that when you have people that have countries that are run by cartels and they've been sending their people over here, they're essentially responsible for drug running and they're not wanting to work with the U.S. government, I think that that's a different story. And so I'm obviously not for any more foreign intervention, but I also understand the behind-the-scenes conversations and also the intelligence reports that went into this. This is not a decision that was made lightly, and I do think that the administration is sending a very powerful signal internationally to the international community not to mess with the United States.
Really quickly, did you support the pardoning of the Honduran president for narco trafficking and being sentenced for 45 years in the United States? Do you support that decision by President Trump or not?
I never issued a statement on that, and I'm not a huge fan of pardoning any narco traffickers, period. But again, I'm not the president, and based on what his decision processing was for that.
Okay. Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming on and taking our questions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. God bless.